She smiled like a saint, but I saw the blade behind her words. Jason liked roast chicken. That's why Elise made it. Bone-in thighs with rosemary and lemon, crisped skin exactly how he used to love it as a boy. She'd even baked a peach cobbler, despite the heat wave curling around her ankles from the oven. Her hands trembled only slightly as she set the table. Jason arrived first, predictably distracted, fiddling with his phone like it might solve his whole life. Brooke floated in after him, perfume-forward, voice sugar-dipped. "Smells amazing in here," she said, sliding her bag onto the bench like she owned the house. Elise wiped her hands on the apron. "Hope you're hungry." They sat. Elise served. The chicken was tender, the green beans perfectly blanched, the mashed potatoes smooth and buttery. Small talk murmured across the table like a stream too shallow to drown in, until Brooke reached for her wine and smiled that tight, photogenic smile. "You know, Elise," she said lightly, "you almost salted this perfectly." Jason barely looked up. Elise paused, fork in midair. She heard it, that needle under Brooke's tone. Almost. Elise said nothing, just nodded and took a sip of her iced tea. Jason let out a sharp exhale. "Don't start." Brooke blinked innocently. "Start what? I'm just saying. It's great. Just could use a touch more salt." Elise felt it in her chest, that slow churn, like a storm deciding whether to gather. She looked at Jason. He wasn't defending her. Not really. He never did anymore. Not since Brooke. Dessert came out next. The cobbler's golden crust gleamed under the dining room light. Brooke took a bite, closed her eyes like she was tasting fine art, then said softly, "I remember your old one being sweeter, but this is lovely too." There it was again. Lovely too, like a consolation prize. Elise swallowed, but the bite tasted like cardboard. The room tightened around her, thick with curated smiles and unspoken venom. After dinner, as Elise collected the plates, Brooke followed her into the kitchen. Too close, too quiet. "You okay?" Brooke asked, tilting her head like a nurse visiting a difficult patient. "You seem off again. I know these dinners can be a lot." Elise turned, a smile carefully stitched onto her face. "I'm fine." Brooke's eyes sparkled. "Of course you are." The words lingered like smoke. Elise didn't answer. She turned back to the sink, letting the hot water scald her fingers just enough to remind her she was still there. When they finally left, Jason hugged her like a formality, eyes flicking to Brooke for approval. Elise stood in the doorway, watching their car pull away, headlights slicing through the dusk. She didn't cry. Instead, she walked back to the kitchen, dried her hands, and picked up her phone. She hadn't used the voice recorder app in years, decades maybe, but her fingers found it like a muscle memory. She stared at the screen for a moment, then tapped New Recording. It didn't feel like revenge. Not yet. It felt like protection. Later that night, tucked into bed, she reread the recipe card her late husband had written out years ago, his handwriting still crisp, still alive on the page. She traced the words, "Don't forget the salt. It's all in the balance." Her phone buzzed. A text from Jason. "Brooke's worried. Said you seemed confused again tonight. Think we should talk?" Elise read it twice, then once more. She turned off the light, lay in the dark, and felt something shift inside her, like a thread, pulled taut, and finally snapping loose. Brooke texts Jason privately. "Your mom's slipping. We need to talk." He didn't ask me what happened. He asked if I was taking my pills. The next morning, Elise made coffee the same way she always had. Slowly, precisely, one scoop for each cup and one for the pot. The quiet hum of the machine filled the kitchen, and for a moment she let herself pretend everything was still simple. Then came the knock. Not the doorbell. A knock. Jason's knock. 3 short raps, impatient and unsure, like he wanted to speak without actually being there. She opened the door. Jason stepped inside, eyes darting past her, scanning the living room like something might jump out at him. He smelled like cologne and guilt. "Elise," he started, using her name, not Mom. "Can we sit for a second?" She led him to the kitchen, gestured to the table. He didn't take off his jacket. "You want coffee?" He shook his head. She sat across from him, folding her hands in her lap. Jason stared at the tabletop like it might hold answers. Brooke's worried. About what? You. She thinks, he sighed, she thinks you might be slipping a little. The words didn't land all at once. They sank in slowly, like a needle through fabric. She said you were confused last night, that you... He paused, eyes flicking up briefly, asked her the same question 3 times. Elise blinked. I didn't. She said you forgot where you put the salt. There was nothing wrong with the food, Elise said, voice firm but low. Jason didn't answer. She leaned forward. Do I seem confused right now? He hesitated. That's not the point. It's exactly the point. Jason scratched the back of his neck. Are you... taking everything? I mean, meds? Anything the doctor prescribed? The room went still. Elise sat up straighter, fingers curling slightly. Is that really why you came here? Jason looked away. Elise's heart ached. Not in that sharp, breaking way, in the dull, disappointing way that settles in after too many small betrayals. You didn't ask me what happened, she said softly. You asked if I was taking my pills. He stood. Look, I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm just trying to understand. You don't want to understand, she said. You want to be reassured. Jason lingered at the door, hand on the knob. I'll call later. She didn't respond. When the door closed behind him, Elise didn't move right away. She just sat there, eyes on the table, coffee gone cold. It wasn't the first time someone had questioned her clarity, but hearing it from Jason, her own son, hit differently, deeper. She picked up her phone and called Nora. Nora answered on the second ring. Elise? I think she's trying to gaslight me, Elise said, and now Jason's repeating it. Nora's voice was immediate, steady. I believe you. Elise let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Nora didn't hesitate. Then record everything, start tonight, every interaction, every moment you doubt yourself. Let the proof do what your words can't. Elise nodded, even though Nora couldn't see it. Okay. That evening, she didn't make dinner. She reheated soup from the freezer and let it simmer while the sky turned the color of bruised peaches outside. She kept her phone nearby, the recorder app open. She practiced pressing record without looking, just a thumb flick, like muscle memory. Later, she set the phone on the counter as she rinsed dishes. The silence of the house was so complete she could hear the tick of the old kitchen clock. Then, voices, not hers. Brooke's, laughter distant but distinct. If she brings up last night, just smile and nod. She'll forget by morning. Elise froze, dish halfway into the sink. She hadn't heard the front door. Elise sets her phone on the counter and hears Brooke's voice before she walks into the kitchen. I had my phone recording and still couldn't believe what I heard. The voice came from the hallway. Light, sharp, not meant to carry, but clear enough for Elise to hear. Brooke. Elise froze, her hands still dripping soap-slick water into the sink. She turned her head slightly, careful not to move too fast, afraid the creak of the floorboards might warn her. The phone on the counter was still glowing, the red recording light blinking in the corner. Brooke was saying, she's always been a little off, but now it's like full-on forgetful. Yesterday she asked me where her keys were while holding them. Bless her heart. Another voice crackled faintly. Someone on speakerphone. A woman. Laughing. Brooke laughed too. Honestly, she's like a weird mix of Snow White and Norman Bates, like, oh dear, where did I put my mind? Her voice slid into a mocking, high-pitched imitation of Elise. I think she's lonely and bored, and her brain's just collapsing in on itself. Elise stood still, every cell in her body bristling, not from the insult, but from the performance. Brooke had practiced that voice, that version of her. She moved slowly toward the doorway, but the voices stopped abruptly. A few seconds of silence followed. Then Brooke's voice again, closer now. Elise's breath caught. She rewound, played it again. She hadn't imagined it. Brooke had staged it, sabotaged her, lied outright to Jason's face. She stood there in the dark, the glow of the oven clock illuminating the counter like a spotlight. The phone's screen was still lit, Elise tapped a few buttons and opened her email. The subject line came to her without thought, like instinct. Insurance. She attached the file, sent it to herself, to Nora, and, after a pause, to a private folder in the cloud, just in case. Elise emails herself the file, subject line, insurance. If they think I'm losing my mind, I'll let them, for now. Elise started keeping 2 calendars. One was real, appointments, bills, doctor visits. The other sat out in plain sight, carefully littered with crossed-out dates, made-up reminders, a few forgotten entries in pencil. Brooke noticed. "Oh," she said one afternoon, eyeing the calendar. "You had a podiatrist appointment yesterday." Elise blinked slowly. "Did I?" She stared at the calendar like it was a painting she didn't recognize. Brooke smiled like a nurse about to win an argument. Jason, sitting nearby with his face buried in his phone, didn't even look up. Perfect. Every interaction was an opportunity now. Elise let the pauses stretch longer, let her confusion bloom just wide enough to seem real. She misplaced her reading glasses, then casually slipped them back on 10 minutes later, as if they'd never been missing. And Brooke? Brooke grew bolder. She took calls in the hallway with the door cracked open, letting her voice drop into whispery concern. "She's repeating herself?" "Yes, like multiple times a day. It's not safe for her to be alone forever." Elise would quietly press record. She had a folder now, dozens of clips, time-stamped, cataloged by room and subject. Nora backed them up methodically, labeling everything O. They wanted paperwork. I gave them performance. The building was newer than she expected. Glass, clean lines, chrome fixtures. Elise adjusted her pearl earrings in the car's visor mirror, checked her lipstick once more. Not too much. Just enough. She walked into the law office with her shoulders square and her heels clicking softly against the tile floor. The receptionist barely looked up. Elise gave her name and was led down a quiet hallway into a beige conference room. The elder law attorney, mid-40s, trim, polite, greeted her with a practiced smile. "Elise, thanks for coming in. I know this probably felt a little out of the blue." She sat across from him, legs crossed at the ankle, hands folded neatly on her purse. "Not at all," she said smoothly. "I always make time for administrative housekeeping, especially when it involves my mental fitness." The attorney chuckled awkwardly, but blinked a little too quickly. He had expected someone smaller, she could tell. Frailer. She offered nothing of the sort. "Right," he said. "So, your daughter-in-law submitted a petition for a preliminary evaluation. It's not legally binding at this stage." "I understand," Elise said. "You're gathering impressions and paper." He nodded. "Yes, just some background. We have a few questions, if that's all right?" She gave him the smile she used to give the school principal when Jason was 8 and being ridiculous. "Of course," he began asking. Simple things at first. Birth date, address, then, what year is it? Who's the current president? Do you ever find yourself confused in familiar spaces? Elise answered calmly, articulately, with small touches of humor that made the attorney relax without realizing it. She tossed in a quote from Camus just for fun, not showy, just to plant a flag. By the halfway mark, his expression had shifted, less official, more uncertain. He was beggy. That evening she made tea. Sat by the window. She felt like a woman watching a storm crawl toward her, not afraid of the wind, but curious how many trees would break. Her phone vibrated on the table. It was a group text. "Brooke, we need to do something. Let's plan an intervention. She needs help." Elise stared at it, then quietly whispered to herself, "Let's." Elise receives a group text from Brooke. "Let's plan an intervention. She needs help." She said I was unraveling, so I unraveled her instead. Elise didn't cry after the group text. She didn't panic. She unplugged the kettle, poured her tea into the sink, and sat in silence until the glow of the porch light clicked on behind her. Then she picked up her phone and called Nora. 2 days later, Nora arrived with a tote bag that didn't look like much, just canvas and zippers, but inside were 5 tiny cameras no larger than dice, and 2 motion sensors Elise could control from her phone. "Simple. Discreet," Nora said, scanning the kitchen walls like she was choosing art. "You good with placement?" "Absolutely," Elise said. Her voice was calm. Too calm. They started in the hallway, then added one to the living room lamp, one tucked behind the curtain rod in the kitchen, and another in the guest bath. A 5th camera watched over Elise's purse from a corner shelf, its lens tiny and black, the light disabled. "This feels dramatic," Nora said. "This is dramatic," Elise replied, "but only for her." That night, Brooke came by under the guise of checking in. Elise let her inside without a word. Brooke smiled tightly, then leaned down to pick up a set of keys Elise had placed deliberately on the entry table. "These were in the fridge," Brooke said with a soft, shaming lilt. "Were they?" Elise asked mildly. Brooke just smiled. After she left, Elise checked the footage. She watched Brooke walk in, glay. Brooke hummed. "No eggs, no greens, no milk." She turned back with mock concern. "You feeling okay? You didn't forget to shop, did you?" Elise said nothing, just opened the side pantry door and pointed to a second refrigerator tucked around the corner. "Full." Brooke's smile dropped for a millisecond before she caught it. "Oh, I didn't realize you'd started using that again." "I never stopped," Elise said, "but you were never paying attention." Brooke left 20 minutes later, visibly annoyed. That night, Elise reviewed the footage. The fridge cam showed it all. Brooke pulling out 2 cartons of eggs, a half-gallon of milk, and a container of spinach, and dropping each into the small trash bin under the sink, right before Jason was scheduled to visit. Elise leaned forward, staring at the paused frame. Brooke's hand in the trash can, her mouth pressed into a line of performative regret. She clipped the footage, named it, "Groceries Deleted." Camera footage shows Brooke throwing out food before Jason arrives. She invited the whole family, but this time, so did I. Brooke's invitation arrived as a text blast, upbeat, innocent, dinner at our place Sunday. Just family. We need to talk about Mom. Elise read it twice. Mom, not Elise, not Mrs. Warren, just Mom. Like Brooke had already rewritten the script to cast herself as concerned daughter and Elise as the declining lead who didn't know her cues anymore. Fine, Elise thought. Let her direct the play. She replied simply, looking forward to it. I'll bring dessert. Then she called Nora. That Sunday, Elise dressed with care. Blue silk blouse, crisp gray slacks, hair pinned the way her husband used to like. Nothing flashy, just clear, present. The USB was tucked inside a satin coin purse. The portable speaker was charged and wrapped in a napkin beside the cobblers she baked. Peach, like the first day. Brooke's voice filled the room. Laughter, mockery. She's like a weird mix of Snow White and Norman Bates. A few family members shifted in their seats. Another clip. Let's see if she notices, Brooke whispered before twisting the stove knob. Jason blinked. His mouth opened. Closed. A third. These were in the fridge, Brooke said, followed by the footage showing her lifting the keys from the hallway table. The cobbler sat untouched. Elise let the silence build between clips, like footsteps echoing in a hallway no one wanted to be in. Brooke's voice cut through again, this time from the garden cam. She called me 4 times in a row asking the same thing. Then Elise's actual call, once, calm, measured, asking if Jason needed a ride from the station. Jason stood slowly. Brooke stammered, "That's out of context. There's more," Elise said calmly, her thumb pressing pause. She lifted the second USB stick. This one's video. She presses play, and Brooke's voice fills the room. Brooke called me crazy, then mocked me when I left the room. The speaker clicked, and for a moment, the room held its breath. Brooke's voice filled the silence, clear, unmistakable. Honestly, she's like a weird mix of Snow White and Norman Bates. The laugh that followed wasn't a nervous giggle. It was confident, mean, too familiar. Elise didn't look around. She watched the table, hands folded, breath steady. Another clip came next, Brooke whispering into the phone in the hallway. She's forgetting everything. Jason's just too sweet to see it. Then a pause. The faint sound of Brooke zipping Elise's purse shut, followed by her calling Jason later that night. She accused me of stealing. It's not safe anymore. We need to act soon. The room shifted like someone had changed the air pressure. Jason sat frozen, eyes narrowing with each new line. He wasn't just hearing "were." "I agree," Elise replied. "It's not normal to have to protect yourself from family." Jason opened his mouth, then shut it again. He looked down, the weight of months falling onto his shoulders all at once. Brooke's breathing changed, shallow now. Her cheeks were blotched with pink, eyes darting between family members like she was scanning for exits. Elise didn't press play, not yet. She let the silence do what truth couldn't always do, settle. She glanced toward Nora and Lila, both of whom nodded slightly. Present. Witnesses. Then Elise turned her gaze slowly to Jason. He met her eyes. For the first time in months, he didn't look away. "You've heard her voice," Elise said. "Now it's time you see her." Her thumb hovered over the laptop. She pulls out a second USB and says, "This one's video." They watched in silence, and the truth unfolded without commentary. Elise clicked play. The laptop screen glowed, casting faint blue shadows on every face around the table. No one reached for their wine. No one touched the food. The first video opened with a time-stamped frame from Elise's hallway. Brooke entered, her face tight, jaw clenched. She glanced toward the coat rack, reached out, then carefully nudged Elise's purse behind the side table with her foot. The clip cut to later that day, Brooke holding up the same purse, discovering it. Look where it ended up. Poor thing must have forgotten again. Next clip, the kitchen. Elise stirring soup, stepping out for just 20 seconds to answer the door. Brooke reached into the drawer, scattered a handful of receipts across the floor, and set the cutting board diagonally on the stove. Cut to that evening. Brooke telling Jason Elise had left the burner on and the kitchen in disarray. No narration, no commentary, just time-stamped footage, overlaid with matching audio clips and Brooke's own voice, Jason's hand. Elise stood now too, moving toward the hallway, blocking the exit. "You wanted an intervention?" she said, her tone low and almost maternal. "This is it." Brooke's expression twisted between disbelief and rage. "You set me up. I protected myself," Elise said. "Those are different things." Brooke's mouth opened, closed. Jason looked between them, haunted. Elise turned to him, not with pity, but with something quieter, sadder. "Jason," she asked gently, "what else did you believe?" Elise says, "And what else did you believe?" When you're painted as unstable, your silence becomes your sentence. The video ended, but no one moved. The laptop screen dimmed to black, casting the room into a strange half-light. Elise stood at the head of the table, hands still resting gently on the back of her chair, like she hadn't just detonated the entire story Brooke had spent a year crafting. Jason leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed tight. Not defensive, just holding himself together. He hadn't said a word since asking what else he'd believed. Finally, he spoke. "I'm sorry. It came out flat, brittle. I didn't see it. I didn't want to." He looked down, and when he spoke again, it was to no one in particular. "It was easier to believe you were slipping, that something was just off, because if that wasn't true, then everything else—" His voice cracked, then vanished. Elise didn't respond. She didn't need to. Around the table, relatives shifted uncomfortably. Lila whispered something to her sister and stood, walking over to Elise. "I didn't know," she said, voice small. "I'm sorry, too. We just assumed." A cousin added, "She made it sound so convincing." "She always does," Nora said. She hadn't moved from her seat, but her voice cut through the shame hanging in the room. "That's how this works. You question your own instincts until you don't have any, Ellie." He looked like a man waking up from anesthesia. Jason stood on the porch like a man who'd wandered out of a burning building and only just realized the heat had followed him. His jaw worked, like he had a dozen false starts trapped between his teeth. Elise didn't offer him a seat. He sat anyway. The wooden swing creaked beneath his weight, and they sat in the blue hush of twilight, porch light humming above them like an old memory. "I should have asked questions," Jason said finally. "I didn't. I let Brooke steer." Elise nodded once. "I noticed." He let out a soft, bitter laugh. "God, Mom. Some of those things she said, I knew they sounded off, but every time I brought it up, she'd explain it. Make it sound like concern." "Concern can wear any costume it wants," Elise said. Jason rubbed his face with both hands. "I think I wanted it to be you. Not because I wanted you to suffer, but because if it was you slipping, I wouldn't have to confront what she really is." Elise looked out at the street. A dog barked 2 houses down. A neighbor's porch light flickered on. "I get it," she said. "Pretending is easier. Until it isn't." Jason turned toward her, his voice lower now. "What do I do now?" Elise met his gaze, steady and unflinching. "That depends. Do you want to keep pretending?" He flinched. Not because the question was harsh, but because it wasn't. "I don't," he said. "I want to see clearly. I think I need help to do that." "Then get it," she said. "You can't untangle this on your own. You believe someone who weaponized trust. That doesn't go away just because you're sorry." Jason swallowed hard. "I'll find a counselor." Elise nodded slowly. "Good. But don't do it to prove something to me. Do it to fix the part of yourself that made this feel safe." Jason looked down at his hands. "I'll talk to her, Brooke." "Not with me," Elise said firmly. "No." That night, they didn't talk. But she heard him doing dishes, not out of guilt, just contribution. In the days that followed, the family who had once sent her question mark texts and long, patronizing emails started sending a different kind. Nora had shared a few files with Lila, who had shared them again, rippling outward quietly, like Elise's truth was finally taking up the space it always should have had. Messages trickled in. "I'm so sorry for not seeing it. We should have asked more questions. Do you want company sometime this week?" They came with no conditions, no expectations. Elise answered them when she felt like it. Nora came by with groceries and 2 paperbacks under her arm. "It's wild," she said, pouring tea. "You know how many women I've talked to who've been through this exact thing?" Elise raised a brow. "Gaslighting by in-laws? Gaslighting by anyone who claims they're acting out of love while quietly stripping your agency." Elise smiled faintly. "That sounds like a support group flyer." "Funny you should say that," Nora replied, pulling a folded pamphlet from her coat pocket. "Private, discreet, just stories, no pressure to talk." Elise took the paper, read it slowly. She didn't commit, but she didn't throw it out either. That evening, while cleaning out a desk drawer, she found an old photo tucked inside a book. Jason was maybe 11, grinning wide, teeth missing, arms thrown around her shoulders at a 4th of July picnic. She looked younger, yes, but not just physically. There was a softness in her expression she hadn't worn in years. She traced her thumb across the glossy edge. And then she paused. She had thought seeing the image would make her ache, but instead she felt something stranger, a kind of fierce tenderness. That girl in the photo, the one clinging to her side like she was the safest place in the world, he didn't smile, just held the elevator door open a little longer than necessary. Back home, Elise took the folded letter from the kitchen and slid it into a fresh manila envelope labeled Intimidation, unfiled. Then she logged into her encrypted folder and began anonymizing the recordings, stripping names, blurring faces. It was tedious, careful work, therapeutic in its precision. That week, she brought a copy to her first support group. The room was dimly lit, folding chairs arranged in a loose circle. No one wore name tags. No one asked questions. You shared when you were ready, or not at all. Elise waited until the second meeting to speak. "I used to think the worst part was that she lied about me," she said softly. "But it wasn't. The worst part was being in a room full of people I loved and knowing I was invisible." One woman wept. Another took her hand. Afterward, a woman from the group, tall, silver-haired, with the posture of someone who'd spent years holding herself together, approached Elise. "We're organizing a private event," she said. "Women only. No press. No cameras. Just stories that deserve to be told. Would you speak?" Elise hesitated. "I'm not an activist." "You're not invisible either," the woman replied. Elise didn't say yes. Not then. But she didn't say no. Back home, she walked past the bedroom where Jason now stayed. His door was ajar. He was on the phone with a therapist, scheduling a consultation. Elise didn't interrupt. Instead, she went to her desk, pulled out a blank sheet of paper and began writing, not a speech, just a memory, one she didn't want anyone else to rewrite. Days later, she stood backstage at a small community center. The event was modest, rows of folding chairs, soft lighting, a mic stand flanked by potted ferns. She wore a navy sweater and no makeup. She didn't need armor. A coordinator handed her the mic. Instead, she let her words roll like slow thunder across the room, describing isolation that wears a smile, gaslighting done with tea and tenderness, how silence is weaponized until even your own doubt turns against you. "They made me question my memory," Elise said, "my instincts, my sanity, and when I couldn't deny the truth anymore, I started recording it." She let that sit for a beat. No apology, no elaboration. A woman in the front wiped her cheek. Another leaned forward, eyes wide and wet. Elise finished softly, without crescendo. "You don't have to raise your voice to reclaim your life. You just have to stop lending it to someone else." The room was utterly still. Then someone clapped, softly. Then another. Then the whole room, hands rising not out of spectacle, but solidarity. Elise exhaled. Her shoulders sank, not from exhaustion, but relief. When she finally stepped down, the first woman to hug her smelled faintly of lavender and said, "That was mine too, every word of it." The next handed her a tissue and said, "I left last year, still scared, still healing. A woman with braids and a nervous smile handed Elise a card. If you ever want to come speak at the shelter, or just listen, either. Brooke was gone. She had slipped out somewhere between reclaim your life and stop lending your voice. Elise hadn't needed to watch her leave to know she couldn't stay. Nora met her at the side of the room, eyes shining. You did it. I didn't flinch, Elise said. You never had to, Nora replied. She was nearly ready to leave, her purse slung over her shoulder, her coat half-buttoned, when a woman tapped her arm. She looked about 30, denim jacket, wide, cautious eyes. Hi, she said. I wasn't going to say anything, but I heard your name and Jason is your son, right? Elise froze. Yes, she said carefully. Why? The woman looked down, picking at a frayed. Back inside, Elise cleared the kitchen table and opened a drawer that once held her recorder. It was empty now. She had removed it last week. Not because she didn't trust, she still did, selectively, but because the silence in the house no longer felt like a threat. That afternoon, Nora dropped by with a brown paper-wrapped package and a wry smile. For your next chapter, she said, setting it down with exaggerated ceremony. Elise opened it to find a leather-bound journal, blank, unlined, weighty in her hands. Write the truth before they do, Nora said simply, even if no one's listening. Elise didn't answer. She didn't need to. Later that week, she returned to the women's circle, not as a guest, but as a speaker. Once a month, they said, if she wanted, just a place to bring stories too stubborn to stay quiet. She agreed, not for the spotlight, but for the echo. At home, she gathered her files, audio, video, legal records, and organized them into folders, printed each transcript, and sealed everything inside a gray lockbox she slid beneath her bed, not out of fear, just readiness. On Sunday, she set the table for 6. Nothing fancy, no linen napkins, no performance, just roast chicken, mashed potatoes, a little mint in the iced tea. Jason brought rolls, Nora brought Lila, and Elise brought herself, fully. They sat around the table like people do when they're trying again. Not perfect, but honest. No one filled every pause. No one made jokes to cover the weight in the room. Instead, they listened, to one another, to the story that had no narrator for too long. Jason said, I've started journaling too, Lila said. I checked on Aunt Margie. She's good. And furious at herself. Nora raised her glass and said, to not being invisible. Elise didn't toast. She just smiled. After dessert, peach cobbler, naturally, she stepped into the kitchen and looked around. No cameras.